Hey everybody, this is Father Warner here, and we are in the Monday of the third week of Lent. Our Gospel is taken from Luke chapter 4, verses 24 to 30, and the first reading is from the second book of Kings, chapter 5, verse 1 to 15. Now, I'm going to begin with the Gospel of Luke because it's linked to the first reading. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus seems to make a reference to a narrative taken from 2 Kings. Now, what's happening first of all in the Gospel of Luke? You see that Jesus in chapter 4 has come out of the wilderness. He has been tempted by Satan and he comes to his hometown, Nazareth, where he launches his ministry. And we're told he goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his practice. And that's something that we can learn right off the bat from Jesus. He never took a holiday on the Sabbath. He went there as was usually his practice. And remember that when Jesus went to a synagogue, you didn't have to be a priest at that point of time. A synagogue, which was a place of prayer, they would invite any learned person, any rabbi, to give the teaching for that day. And so they handed him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. We know that they gave him the book, but he chose the verse. And he chose his manifesto. The Spirit of God has been given to me he has sent me to set captives free, to declare a year of favor, to bring good news to the poor, etc., etc. And no sooner has he finished this, that we are told that people are amazed. They speak well of him. Now, whenever the good news is proclaimed, bad news follows, because someone says, hey, we know this boy. This is Joseph's son, is he not? He's a carpenter's son. We know him. He's our boy from our village. Where did he get all this learning? And Jesus immediately says to them, he says, you know what? A prophet is never welcomed into his own home and country. He's always rejected. And to support this, he gives them the example of 2 prophets from Israel. Elijah, who was sent to a widow from the Sidonian country of Zarephath, and Elisha, who cures Naman the Syrian. And that links us, as it were, to the first reading taken from 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1 to 15. Now, in this text, you will hear the entire narrative of what happened between Elisha and Naaman. So, just for you, some of you who may not be familiar, Naaman was a commander in the Syrian army. It's mentioned in scripture as Aram. Aram is modern day Syria. And Naaman has leprosy. Now, it's quite clear that the leprosy that Naaman had in Syria did not have the religious and social effects it had in Israel. So let me explain. If you read the book of Leviticus, it clearly tells you what has to be done in case somebody has leprosy. And it's really very stringent because you were not allowed to live in the village. You were ostracized, you were boycotted. It was really difficult. You had to cover your mouth, you had to shout leper, you had to ring a bell. But this was because it had a religious sanction in Israel. Clearly in Syria, it didn't matter that you had leprosy because we know that the king of Aram still finds favor with Naaman. Now, it must have bothered him to some degree to see body parts deteriorate because leprosy takes Hansen's disease, as we know it today, is deadly. So we are told that Naaman's servant girl, who was from Israel, perhaps captured on a raid and brought to Syria, tells her master, listen, why don't you go to the prophet who is in Samaria? And Naaman goes to the king and says, well, can I go? The king gives him his blessings, gives him a letter to the king of Israel and says to him, can you just ask your prophet to do something? Now we know that when the king of Israel sees this letter, he tears his robes because he thinks, am I a god? Am I going to cure you of leprosy? I mean, this is the worst thing that you could have asked for me. Are you just picking on a fight? But Elisha, the prophet, tells him, relax. Just send Naaman to me. And so Naaman, we are told, comes in his pomp, his splendor, his chariots with all the gold and the silver and the festal robes that he's carried. He lands up at Elisha's house and he's awfully disappointed. Why? Because we are told that Elisha doesn't even come to the door. In fact, he sends a messenger and says, well, my master has asked you to go and wash in the river Jordan 7 times. And Elisha is furious. Now, herein lies something that we can learn. You see, many of us expect God to work in our lives the way we want it or the way we expect it. Elisha was horribly disappointed. Naaman was horribly disappointed. He says, well, we have 2 fantastic rivers back home. I mean, what is this river Jordan? And honestly, if you go to Israel, I'm going there next month on a Holy Land trip. But when I first saw the river Jordan, at least when we crossed it from into Egypt, I was disappointed. It looked like a small brook. And you can imagine Naaman saying like, really? Wash in this little brook? So you and I expect God to work in the ways we want him to. And that's what the little girl tells her master when he's disappointed. She says, my lord, my master, if the prophet had to ask you to do something difficult, if God had to ask you to stand on your head, if God had to tell you go on a pilgrimage, would you do it? And the answer for many of us would be yes. But when God speaks to us simply and asks ordinary things of us, we seem to think that God doesn't care. Good sense prevailed, and I hope good sense prevails with you and me, because Elisha went and washed himself 7 times, and he was cured of his leprosy, and he comes back grateful to the prophet Elisha. I want to end with this, with the words of our Blessed Mother at Cana to the stewards. She said, do whatever he asks you. And very often, that asking may be tremendously simple. I want to suggest something, since we are in the business of water, talking about dipping ourselves in the Jordan. When you go to church the next time, take your hand, dip it in holy water, and in faith, cover yourself with it. By the way, when we enter church, we sign ourselves. It's a way of cleansing. But if you do it with faith, maybe you have cancer, maybe you have an incurable disease, and you just say, Lord, in faith, I cover myself with this holy water. I'd love to hear your story. But you may also be like me, who says, I have what I have. I can't do anything about it. I cover myself with holy water in simplicity and still accept the fact that you may choose not to heal me in the way I expect healing. I hope you enjoyed this teaching. And if you do, subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends, and do leave a comment, especially your own testimonies of healing. Bye for now. I'll see you again tomorrow.